Hi, folks. Today we're with Michael Sullivan. We don't know each other that well, but I can tell you he's a true blue Bitcoiner and love to pick his brains as we do on this podcast. So, Michael, you have the stage.
Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Sullivan. I have been a software engineer for quite a long time and a novelist on top of that. Um, in Bitcoin for about the last 4 years now, and have been so deeply inspired by it that I couldn't help but basically dedicate my entire next novel to the topic. So excited to get into that. Excited to get into some other just Bitcoin stuff because, I mean, who doesn't love Bitcoin?
Yeah, brilliant. That's cool. So wow, software engineering slash Bitcoin slash novelist. That's quite eclectic, right? I mean, that's a hell of a Venn diagram.
Oh yeah, I very much enjoy challenging self pursuits. So like learning about software engineering very much inspired me to um, write as well. So the
Hmm.
very similar vibes, solving problems, but just the kind of fictional problems and story structures. And then
Yeah.
I feel like the constantly learning thing really opens you up to Bitcoin when you very first learn
Mm.
about it. That definitely made the transition easier for me, at least. Like constantly thinking about the problems that exist in life and how to best solve them made the Bitcoin rabbit hole go a little bit more quickly for me, I suspect.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then, yeah, that's interesting because I mean, I come from a network engineering background, right? So I don't do software, I do all the radio frequency stuff and the 4G stuff. So I'm much more on the lower stack, if you know what I mean, on the lower levels of the OCI model. So it's really cool to get a software perspective, right? So when did you come across Bitcoin, and what do you remember why you were drawn into it? What did you feel when you first kind of encountered it? Because a lot of people obviously don't get it off the bat, right? So I'm just curious to see how you got into it, and then what kept you sort of digging deeper into the rabbit hole.
I think I have a similar story to so many people out there in that regard, where I came across it multiple times and completely ignored it the first. Um, Came across it once in probably 2012, 2013 on some online gambling stuff. Had no interest, just thought it was silly. Again
Yeah.
in about 2015, 16, and then a couple years after that, some coworkers were basically gambling with Ethereum, and I was like, "This is just the silliest thing. I can't imagine why anybody would put so much of their money in this thing."
Hmm.
But as we do, we see it go up, see it go down, think it's going to crash, realize it cannot and will not, and then back in early 2021, realize that this thing is still around somehow. I'm like, all right, I'm going to put my ego aside and learn about this at the very least. Put a little bit of money in, just see what it's about. And the rabbit hole went pretty quick after that. Uh,
Mm.
I
Yeah.
did not fully understand how profound of an effect it could have to have financial freedom for people across the world. And
Hmm.
especially seeing some things that were happening during that time in the world, it really made the pure financial freedom just seem so incredibly useful as a tool. And
Yeah.
from there, I was deep into it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think there's so much of, and I think, yeah, for me, it was like the COVID period, right? I mean, when I'm kind of locked up at home with not a whole lot to do and the world's going mental, and I'm like, yeah, what's this Bitcoin? Because I already owned Bitcoin at that point, but I'd never fully understood what it was. And I never, I was like, number go up, brilliant, right? Because I was so dollarized in my head, if you know what I
Yep.
mean. It's like everything is measured, but like the dollar became the denominator, or any fiat currency becomes the denominator. But I think Bitcoin literally just blows the denominator out. It's like everything is now measured in satoshis, right? Um, and do you find yourself sort of thinking more about, oh my God, this costs X satoshis? Like, has that change happened at all for you?
Oh, very much so. And especially realizing in hindsight some poor decisions that I made.
Yeah.
Like for example, a couple years ago, I did a fantasy football league with some friends, and it was like $100. I was like, oh, I did the denomination Satoshi at the time, and then at the end of the year, I went a little bit back, and I realized like if I would just kept this in Bitcoin, I would
Mm,
have just been wealthier, having not put my money into silly things.
yeah.
Uh, and then seeing other purchases, seeing how much more they would be worth in Bitcoin terms had I just not purchased them, has made me so much more frugal, like just hesitant to spend money when it's both able to increase in value so much, but also positively contribute to the world too. Like that, I think
Yeah.
that was things that really fundamentally made me so interested too. It was just more than purely an investment vehicle, but I
Yeah.
actually feel like in the act of holding it, I make the world a better place in some small way.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's the number go up that draws a lot of people in, but then they stay for the actual, the world changing sort of ethos of Bitcoin, right? I really like this idea that we're like a bunch of like random people across the world who fully understand the money and who know this is inevitable. Like it's like it's almost like you're sitting on a royal flush and you just watch the chips fall on the table, like.
Yeah, I love the
Um,
analogy. It really truly does feel that way, where you see everybody else getting so excited about their speculative investments going up. You're like, I know I'm winning. You can say
yeah,
whatever you want. I've got,
yeah.
I've got the cards.
Yeah, and what are the sort of pushbacks you get then when you start, comparing to your normie friends or your family members, because people always, I mean, my family doesn't get it fully yet. My wife gets it, which is great. Uh, but and I'm going to raise my we just had a baby as well, so I'm going to raise him as a true blue Bitcoiner for sure.
Mhm.
But it's when I talk to my friends, my colleagues, and they're always talking about the next stock investment or the next stock pick or the new whatever real estate thing. Very few of them actually venture to understand money itself. And I never try and orange pill them because I feel it's just, you come off as trying to sell something, right? And I'm not here to sell Bitcoin because I mean, Bitcoin doesn't need a marketing department. That's the that's the whole idea. So what are some of the common questions you get asked about it from newbies, and how do you respond to them?
Man, I'm sure I get a lot of similar things to a lot of the people. The big one that I think that people get really hung up on, at least that like some of my family members and wife initially too, was how can I even use this thing?
Yeah,
Like they don't think
yeah,
this
yeah,
is
yeah,
function as money until they can go to the store and buy
yeah,
like a steak with it or whatever. Um, that's very frequently been a pushback. Uh, the one that I think was a huge click for me that I really wish that more people would more deeply understand was just how profound self custody is and
yeah.
the ability to hold money either in like 12 words or a multi custodial approach, just like how profound that is compared to the current system where you're
Mm,
relying so much on a bank. Um, it's really counterintuitive, especially cryptography. Like I mentioned, I was an engineer, so I
yeah.
had a little bit more of a understanding of that. I'd always kind of enjoyed math, and so going into the cryptography rabbit hole, seeing how all of that worked, kind of made some
Right.
things for me. But it's just one of the most counterintuitive aspects for people that are have no technical backing whatsoever.
Mm,
Is how powerful cryptography can be, and just how impossible it is to brute force private key.
yeah. So is that your sort of aha moment when you realize that, and when you realize that this is effectively unbreakable and it's decentralized,
That
you
was the
know?
thing that did it most for me. That coupled
Yeah.
with perfect scarcity.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I
For
think
me, it's
people
Mhm.
go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say for me, of course, the scarcity element. It took me so long to figure that out because I mean, yes, I know there's 21 million Bitcoin, right? Which is fine. I mean, yeah, but there's also finite supply of Monet painting. There's one Mona Lisa, right? So what's the big deal, right? But it's not just that; it's the fungibility of it. It's the fact that you can break it up to 100 million pieces. You can't do that with the Mona Lisa, right? So okay, fine, okay, Bitcoin wins in that regard. But the clincher for me was like this weird thing that Bitcoin does, which is to convert real world energy and time, store it in the cyberspace, right? And then it's for you, it's locked away for you until the time that only you access it again. That's like really weird. It's like breaks the link between reality and like virtual reality. It's kind of like it's out there, but it's got an element of the real world in it, right? Like that's such a weird. It's like you're breaking the matrix with that.
Oh yeah, Satoshi's vision to connect the virtual world with the physical world is.
Yeah,
Like, I mean, there's so many profound things that he did, so many really powerful decisions, but that connected those two so intimately for the first time ever, and
yeah,
it broke previous preconceptions of the world. Like
yeah,
it's so cool to me hearing the things that made it click for you, because I know we're going to talk about this later, but one of the
yeah,
reasons I wanted to write a novel about Bitcoin is because there's so many different things that people have that quick moment for.
yeah.
Like for me, it was the cryptography thing, but I don't really think that's the most normal one. Some
No,
people have other ones about the scarcity or whatever, or the proof of work really might make things click for them. But
Mm.
trying to lead somebody through a story and then quickly being able to show them all these different variables is something I've been giving a lot of thought about, just because I think it could help with people's orange pilling journey.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think so. I've written. I'm a bit of an author myself. So I've self-published my book about. It's got nothing to do with Bitcoin, right? It's just a self-published comedy novel. So that's out there. But the interesting thing is, I've also flirted with the idea of doing a Bitcoin novel, right? So, but I look at it in terms of like, one of those like anthology series, like something like Black Mirror, where there's like totally different, like unconnected things.
One of my all-time favorite shows.
Yeah, exactly. And like for me, it's like maybe I can have a narrative with like, I don't know, 12 different stories in the book, but each story kind of like each the characters in each story discover Bitcoin in their own unique way. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And it's kind of like the constant, because Bitcoin, I think, and this is the other cool thing about Bitcoin, it solves rich people's problems and poor people's problems at the same time, right? And again, like it's like the internet, for example, that does that, right? So that's why it caught fire. So it's really cool. So where are we in your book? I mean, what stage is it in, and how seriously are you gonna like? Are you working on serious deadlines here? Do you have a publisher? Tell us about it.
So very seriously, I'm a little over 2 years in, I think. So I'd written a previous novel. That one was about a 3 year process. And after that one, I immediately, towards the end of that one, I was like chomping at the bit to write something about Bitcoin because I'd already fallen the rabbit hole and I was so excited about it. Um, but yeah, it's been a very serious process. I will be doing more formal editors, beta readers, the whole thing. Um,
Hmm.
but I'm very fortunate that my wife is an extremely good editor. So
Oh
her
wow,
and
nice.
I are talking about it and figuring out the
Yeah,
structure of the book and things. So doing a lot of
cool.
that right now, and I suspect it'll be fully wrapped up within the next 6 months, maybe on the sooner side than that actually. Um, no formal publisher, mostly just because I want to have intimate control over the novel.
Yeah,
I've done this process a little bit before in the previous book, and
yeah,
yeah, I'm very comfortable with it. I'm familiar with the process, so I'm just doing my own thing.
awesome.
You mentioned the multiple storylines to show Bitcoin. That's something I actually given a lot of thought to in this one too. In the first novel I wrote, it followed a singular character because I really
Yeah,
wanted to get inside the mind of one person as you went through a journey. But with Bitcoin, I wanted to show how different people can think about this thing, showing multiple different perspectives. Some people in worse financial circumstances, some people in
mm,
better, and
yeah,
showing how different people can see it. Because I think having, like you
yeah,
mentioned, multiple different routes can help
yeah.
make that process quicker for people.
Yeah, that's super cool. That's brilliant. I mean, that sounds like, yeah, like you said, like the Great American Bitcoin novel. I'm surprised there hasn't been one already, right? Because I mean, well, Bitcoin's been around 14, 15 years now. And there's so many like cultural aspects to Bitcoin that I'm sure creative Bitcoiners out there must have thought, hey, this is brilliant. Like, I mean, again, I'm surprised Hollywood hasn't taken a shot at this, right?
Blows my mind how this does not
Yeah.
exist. I do not understand it, and it's so coupled to the ideas that America was founded on too, like the
Mm,
liberty ethos and freedom and thing. But even more so, where it's
yeah.
pure financial freedom for everybody across the world. There's no person who can stop you from using this protocol. It
Yeah.
just profoundly connected to some of the ideas that the United States was founded on. So
Mm.
I can't believe this hasn't been done yet, but I'm going to do it.
Yeah, and I think it's yeah. Well, exactly. I mean, look, I mean, maybe it hasn't been done yet because you're going to be the first one to do it, right? Like there you go. So so that's great. I mean, it's like an open goal, and why not? Why not take a shot at it? That's interesting to me as well when you talk about, I guess, the American ideals, right? Because again, it's almost sort of enshrined in the Bitcoin protocol, and I think, I mean, it's kind of human standards, really, more than I wouldn't even Americanize it. I think every society develops on hard money. I think we've seen that happen all throughout, and I think fiat is actually an experiment, if anything, over time. I mean, if you look at the broad human history, it's always been sound money, or as sound as money as we can get. And fiat's just like this aberration in the middle. It's like the last 60, 70, 80 years, it's just been this blip. Um, so do you see us going down that route again? Do you see like the Bitcoin standard actually happening? I mean, we're gonna, like Trump talks about a US stockpile, whatever, strategic reserve. Kamala's talking about blockchain. I don't fully believe either of them that they get it. But but it's mainstream, right? I mean, people are now vying for our votes on this. So is this going to happen? I mean, are we actually going to stockpile Bitcoin?
I think you hit the nail on the head. Where the exciting thing is the fact that they're talking about it, not that they have some interesting thing to say about
Yeah.
it. But like Trump is just obviously parroting other people that told him what to say. Similar thing with Kamala. Um, just the fact that it's a topic is amazing, and I think the
Mm,
important thing to not lose sight of. I am insanely bullish about Bitcoin. I do think it's going to be the new reserve standard for the world, purely just based on truth. And the thing, like, this is factually better, and there's never been a form of money more perfected. And I
mm,
don't think there can be. It's like even seeing Ethereum's attempts at ultrasound money, that whole narrative and things like actively deflating in supply currency, I think is also silly. Just like
mm.
the beauty of perfect scarcity either way is just brilliant to me. And then the economy can deflate in relation to it potentially. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm
Have
a
you
crazy.
followed? Yeah, sorry. Have you followed Jeff Booth on this kind of stuff where he talks about, the abundance and scarcity, which I think is really cool, right? I mean, he actually put again. I don't think he's talking bullshit. I think it's legit, and which is why it really kind of it's really I don't understand why economists to a certain degree are they're fiat economists, right? I mean their salary comes from the fact that they're close to the money printer. Okay, fine. They have an incentive not to get Bitcoin. Um, but how come other CEOs like I know Michael Saylor has his MSTR strategy and it's great, but why is nobody else copying that? I mean, why are they sitting on cash, for example, when they have billions of dollars which are melting away when they could easily just protect it with Bitcoin? Is it regulation? Is it that they don't get it? What, or maybe they just don't give a shit because I mean, why should they? They've got billions, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff there. I think it's somewhat reflective of the way that our relatives and friends don't have interest in it too. Where I used to think Bitcoin was an intelligence test, and I think it's a little bit of a emotional intelligence test too. Like
Right.
willingness to accept that you are wrong, willingness to accept that you have more to learn. And you can imagine if you were one of those Fortune 500 CEOs that you have been extremely successful in your life,
Mm-hmm.
very frequently correct,
Mm-hmm.
financially correct. So you likely have an even higher confidence in how intelligent you are in relation
Mm,
to economics, which is another reason I think that Saylor is so brilliant. You can see like his willingness to admit that he was wrong and adapt and change strategies completely at his current age is just so impressive to me and something I'd really like to try to be as I get older because I know it can get so hard and you can really be wrapped up in your previous ways.
mm, Yeah, because I remember, I mean, again, that famous tweet by Saylor, right? Bitcoin's going to go the same way as online gambling. I mean, he's obviously he's obviously changed his tone a lot from there. So tell us about Saylor. Tell us about MicroStrategy. What are they up to, and why are you interested?
It is an incredibly interesting story in my opinion, and I think it's the most interesting thing happening in finance right now. Just to like set the stage a little bit, I am no financial expert. I did go to
Yeah.
school for business and stuff, but I find it really interesting. But there are some brilliant people in the Bitcoin space doing
Hmm.
analysis of financials. That is not me. What I
Right.
do think is incredible is just the fact that he is performing a speculative attack on the US dollar right now, and no one's talking about it.
Mm,
The reflexive flywheel approach and the spinning and intertwining of incentives that they have going on right now is
mm,
wild. Um,
mm,
it's I very frequently had people asking me, since I'm continually bullish on Twitter, about MicroStrategy, like how much of it should I invest in my stack, and like I will never say much. Like it is, I think it's a fun sideshow that's extremely
hmm
interesting, and like I think the majority of everybody's Bitcoin should be in self custody, and you should do the work that direction.
hmm
But I also really believe in what he's doing. And I genuinely want to be part of that and vote a little bit with my dollar for him to continue doing his strategy.
hmm
Um, that's the thing I'm most excited about is just helping be part of this movement. Um, but I think this continues on forever. His ability to get access to the cheapest debt that I simply just never could or you could never do is
Yeah.
a wild thing to take advantage of. And I think it's coming. I think that other corporations are going to begin to see this and
hmm
recognize that they can take advantage of it too. There already is some like SMLR and Metaplanet, et cetera.
Yeah.
There's small people doing that, but it's coming, and economic pain will continue to push more companies into this strategy, especially ones that are extremely cash rich right now,
Yeah.
and watching that get rapidly
Yeah, no,
destroyed.
I agree totally. I think I think we're going to see more micro strategies appear. And I think, I mean, one of the things you said there, which was interesting, right? So the speculative attack on the US dollar being led by essentially a CEO. Okay, it's not the S&P 500, but it's the CEO of a multi-billion dollar company doing it in plain sight, doing it on Twitter, actually. And nobody seems to be talking about it. I think Saylor, well, again, it's my personal opinion. I think Saylor walks the line between being someone like Seyfedin, for example, who is like this true blue Bitcoin maximalist, the dollar's going to burn, every fiat currency is worthless, and all that will remain as Bitcoin. But I think Saylor, I think on a very emotional level, gets that. But I think he can't say that, right? He can't say that on CNBC or whatever. Like, I mean, because that's definitely not going to go down well. Um, but then, does he believe in the US dollar? Because he was talking about giving your Bitcoin to a third party and getting yield on it. And I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I like that idea. I don't want anyone else having my Bitcoin, you know?
I'm glad you brought that conversation up, because that's been one of my favorite podcasts of the last month.
Yeah.
It was just really interesting to see Saylor get a lot more pushback and see some things I actively disagree with him about. Like, I'm not getting yield on my Bitcoin. I'm happy to
No.
keep it locked away. But I also understand, I think it's very easy as a maxi, myself being one, to
Hmm.
think this happens more quickly than it might, and not think about the incremental steps of game theory along the way, where
Right.
debt is not going away next year. I don't think debt's going away in the next 5 years. I don't even know if debt will ever fully go away. So, say we're taking advantage of these things in the incremental term as we take steps towards this end game of pure Bitcoin. I think is going to continue to be a good strategy for a lot of people to use, and I really can't uh, criticize them for doing so and taking advantage of it. Um,
Mm.
yeah, we'll see if the risks get more apparent here. If we have more BlockFi, Celsiuses, these sort of things blow up.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, I just don't think I'm going to be personally taking that risk. I think it's wise to advise people otherwise, but they are doing it way more intelligently than I would be doing it. They clearly understand
Yeah,
what they're
yeah,
doing.
and I think he obviously has inside channels to conversations that are happening at, executive level across various companies. I'm sure he's on the board of other companies, for example, and not just MSTR. I just find that it's because I've been a Sailor fanboy for a long while. I mean, he's pretty much sort of given me my Bitcoin education, right?
Yep.
So, for him to appear, and Safety on the other end is also very good. Sort of, I mean, again, he's a Bitcoin OG, right? So it's kind of like watching these two guys. It's like the master and the apprentice sort of thing, right? Where they both swap places,
Hmm.
and for them to kind of have not it wasn't a heated debate, but to have like a such a core misunderstanding, let's say, uh, about something like Bitcoin yield, I think it really kind of opened my eyes a bit because I was then thinking, okay, well, even if they're going to pay me yield, and yes, I agree, there is debt, like you said, and debt will always remain, right, as far as I can tell, because people are always going to need lines of credit. Is that yield going to be paid in Bitcoin, or is that going to be paid in USD or fiat? Because if it's going to be paid in Bitcoin, why would the lender lend me or give me Bitcoin? It's kind of like Fold app, one of those cards, where you get Satoshis back for every transaction. Those Satoshis are going to be worth a shitload more in 20 years, right? So how does this play out over the long term, you know?
I think in a sense, MicroStrategy is already producing yield on Bitcoin. They're at least proving that you can continue to accrue more Bitcoin per
Hmm.
share on your investment. Um, yeah, I think it's just interesting because the new base rate of return quite required for somebody to have interest in investment completely changes now in this context.
Hmm. Yeah,
Like
the hurdle rate, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, but your hurdle rate for everybody is just like sky high now. Like my people are saying like, oh yeah, I have this investment, you can get 20% per year, and I'm like, that's terrible. I'm not interested in that. But
yeah,
to
yeah, exactly.
other people's minds, it's like, no, I can self custody Bitcoin and get somewhere between 30, 40, 50% CAGR on it or something like that. Why
Yeah,
would I take this risk unless I can get more than that? Which is
yeah,
essentially what MicroStrategy is. Like, I would much rather own real Bitcoin than the ETF.
Hmm.
Both things being the same, I can control one of them. But with MicroStrategy, I do take on the risk of uh, counterparty.
Yeah,
Counterparty risk.
execution risk, for example. I mean, what happens if Sailor gets a bullet in the head, right?
100%.
For
Like
example.
there's
Yeah.
additional risks, but with that risk, you then have the opportunity to make outsized returns, specifically on Bitcoin per share. And I think that kind of thing is going to continue to become more apparent to these big businessmen that we're talking about in the
Mm.
Fortune 500.
Yeah, yeah. No, interesting. I mean, and what do you make of BNY Mellon, for example? Like, I think it's official now, right? So BNY Mellon's going to start custodying Bitcoin. I mean, again, do you trust the banks?
I personally don't, but it's like everything is good for Bitcoin situation, right? Where if there is a market for it and people that want to do it, it's going to happen. It's a net positive. I, I do think that the biggest concern for Bitcoin personally is the very much being these banks adopting it almost too quickly.
Mm.
Whereas if it takes longer and Bitcoin continues to kind of spread out across the plebs, I think it's a huge positive. But if we get a little bit more restrictive on the locations you can spend your Bitcoin, it does start to become a problem. Not a permanent problem. There's always going to be ways around it. There will always be third-party markets and things. I have zero
Mm.
concern about that. But in the short to medium term, like having too many of these institutions be the only on ramps and off ramps to Bitcoin is a for sure something worth worrying about.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's interesting because the other thing I wanted to touch with you was I know we're both super bullish on Bitcoin. And I think most maxis are. It's just as Bitcoin's growing now, and it's it's $1 trillion plus asset. It's going to keep growing. I think it's now unearthing more potential attack routes into Bitcoin. Some of which I wouldn't say scare me, but which I didn't consider before, right? So one of my favorite, I think you already touched on one, which is the on-ramp, off-ramp strategy, right? I mean, like the only way you can get on Bitcoin today as a pleb is actually your bank is allowing you to purchase that.
Mhm.
What happens if the banks simply decide not to do that, right? Well, where do you go? You go to peer to peer. You can buy Bitcoin off me, for example, but then why would you trust me? Then again, stuff like that. So, so that's number one. The other potential thing, which is more technical, and I think you might know from your software background, this is about the mining pool stuff. I don't know if you've been following this. I feel that is a potential banana skin. I think we're sort of sleepwalking into about 6, 7, 8 mining pools globally for Bitcoin, right? That's too small a number, I think, for something like Bitcoin, which I'm a little bit, and maybe I'm technically wrong on that, but I'd love to know your thoughts on that. And then the other potential attack vector is is this idea that okay, right? Countries are gonna, I mean, banks may not ban it, that's fine, and the mining just works on seamlessly, absolutely no problem. But what happens when customers, or not customers, when normal plebs like us are have to declare to the government how much Bitcoin you actually have? Because it's going to be taxed. And what happens if I lie on my taxes? What happens if I forget the password to my Bitcoin wallet? It's not really going to affect Bitcoin, but I really think that's going to freak people out. It's kind of like the drug trade, right? I mean, marijuana could be legal in some states, but you're still going to be a bit iffy about carrying it around with you because you never know. I mean, it's still illegal, sort of, right? So it's kind of like, yeah. So these three things that really sort of, I mean, and these aren't Satoshi's V version one problems. These are first world Bitcoin problems, right? And they all have solutions and workarounds. But I'm just curious, do you think this is gonna, are people out there thinking about this stuff? Do you think this is a threat to Bitcoin?
Oh man, I'm thinking about this stuff. Um,
Yeah.
I like to think in probabilities a lot, or like how likely are each of the outcomes. Could you refresh my memory on what the first one was with BNY Mellon?
So not the BNY Mellon stuff, but it was about, I think it wasn't the mining pool stuff. Sorry, it was, I actually forgot what the first one was. The first threat. Um,
That's okay. I'll go off the
it'll
other
come
one.
back to me.
The mining pools one, I think, is the
Yeah.
highest risk of all of them. I think, like you said, we could sleepwalk into that one without, if nothing changes, we could easily see that happen. Um, I am optimistic for a lot of things that Ocean Pool is doing and some of the problems they're trying to solve. But the concern there is that the incentives are not well enough aligned for that to take over, where a lot of these big mining companies pretty much always have the incentive to join into the larger pool. There is some interesting game theory there that I've never heard anybody discuss that I just think is very interesting. And that is, even if they're so one of the reasons the mining pools is such a risk is because you could potentially have blacklisted UTXOs. They could say that these people, kind of similar to your third point about privacy, they could say these people are not allowed to transact.
Yep.
And if you mine Bitcoin in this pool in the United States or wherever, that we do not allow you to have these UTXOs be spent, right? That's kind of the big concern of the mining pools.
Yeah.
I think there's an interesting incentive there that I do not hear talked about, in that, let's say I have a blacklisted UTXO. And let's say the current transaction fees are like 5 sats per VByte. Well, I'd like to spend that UTXO. I'd be willing to spend quite a lot more than 5 sats per VByte if I really, really need to spend it. Where I think there's an incentive for blacklisted UTXOs, even if that does happen, to pay quite a lot more money to be included in block space. So, like, I don't know how that economy works out, but very much in the same sense that block markets form, I think there could actually be a block market that forms around block subsidies or blacklisted transactions, where even if there's like the 6th, 7th, 8th largest mining pool, and they don't win every block, but as long as there's enough and people are willing to pay more for those transactions that other people are blocking, I think that could actually financially incentivize mining pools to not block these UTXOs because they actually get more per transaction.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I can see how that incentive could pan out. But okay, I guess from again sticking to the mining pool stuff, don't you view that having just 11 mining pools or whatever it is a potential centralization within a decentralized network, right? Now, I agree, each of those individual miners might be decentralized, but end of the day, they're all feeding into one common pool. And I, as a solo miner, I mean, what are my incentives to mine Bitcoin and run my node, right? I mean, if I was to do that, I'm just going to have to wait for a block reward, which I'm very likely not going to hit. So why would I ever turn on my miner? And I think that's, yeah. So curious to hear what do you think about that?
Yeah, in this scenario that I'm proposing, you potentially could be incentivized to join the mining pool where you could get more transaction fees. So
Yeah.
you'd be incentivized to join the full non-blacklisted mining pool where they pay more
Mm-hmm.
for transactions. Maybe you want to support that. I think there has to be some kind of financial reason to support those alternative mining pools, though, rather than just out of the good of your heart. Like, I would much
Yeah.
rather contribute my hash rate to Ocean than like Marapool. I know
Yeah.
that I can, but I think there has to be some kind of financial incentive for those to take over. I don't know how this plays out. I do think it's one of the bigger concerns right now, and I don't have like a fantastic answer for you, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I'm certainly watching it closely, and it makes me pretty
Yeah.
happy that people actively trying to solve that problem.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I think Bitcoin Mechanic has a lot of good stuff on this topic as well. So I definitely would recommend the listeners to give him a look as well. Yeah, sorry, I just remembered. So the on-ramp, off-ramp stuff, right? So that's what it is. So let's say your bank actually stops you from, and this happens in countries. I know countries like my wife's from India, and then her Indian bank account doesn't allow her to buy Bitcoin. I mean, that's it. You can't even spend your own money to buy whatever it is that you want. And what are you going to do about it? Well, not a whole lot, So what do you
Yeah,
do then?
yeah, it's deeply unethical. That's for sure. If they would governments chose to do that, I think so. It's conflicting because BNY Mellon having the ability to custody makes me slightly more optimistic in the sense that the government isn't going to blanket ban these things, or banks aren't going to stop you from actually buying Bitcoin.
Mm.
Flip side, like, if they do control too much of it and they have a lot of Bitcoin, and that's most people's on ramp is through these banks, and they restrict where you send it to, it's the same problem once more. Purely based on the Bitcoin network, like, I can send whatever I want to you. And I think
Yeah,
that it's really hard to break peer-to-peer transactions, and things like BISC, I think, will only continue to grow more popular, or decentralized exchanges, if people aren't familiar with that one.
mm.
Um, in that scenario, where part of the thing that makes Bitcoin so interesting is its anti-fragility,
Yeah,
where the more it's attacked, like, we haven't really had to deal with this bank blocking problem hugely. At least I personally have. I know a lot of people have, but specifically restricting things like don't know, river or something like that. Like it's very rare that this is happening right now. If that were to become more normalized, I do think the free market would play out and you'd see a lot more services pop up and the amount of liquidity on these free market exchanges would go through the roof. Since
Mm.
people would still want to buy Bitcoin, like I still want to buy Bitcoin. It's not changing that for me. If the government starts
Yeah.
banning, I'm going to try to buy even harder.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
So I really do think that we would, in that scenario, we'd really see the anti-fragility aspects of Bitcoin. We'd have more services like that pop up very, very quickly.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. I mean, yeah, exactly. And I think the other route, of course, is, and it's not as good as the real Bitcoin, but maybe potentially having access to the Bitcoin ETFs is a bit of a proxy for those guys who can't, like in mainland China, for example, who can't custody the actual Bitcoin. Maybe if Hong Kong was to have an ETF for Bitcoin, I don't know if they do actually. If they do, then that's your other route, right? But then, yeah, it is still very much a fiat product, I think.
Very much so. And that's the situation where you're completely restricted from, like, there's no on and off ramps if you're using the
No.
ETF. You have to sell, cash out for fiat, and then withdraw, where that's just another massive problem with ETFs and MicroStrategy and mining stocks or whatever. Like, it's a lot harder than people realize to get out of those things. And I think it's
Yeah.
frankly worth it for the freedom aspects to hold a large chunk of your stack, even if you have to take some tax hit to actually get real Bitcoin.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, right. And talking about tax, the other thing I was talking about was what happens when you have to declare your, as a pleb, I guess, back to the government, how much Bitcoin you own. What's the best answer to that question?
Oh man, I don't know if I have a great one, and definitely not anything that I want to like have out there permanently
Yeah.
that I've said about like tax fraud. Um, I think there would be, if that were to happen, I think that it would not be a quick overnight thing. I think there'd be a
Mm,
ton of pushback from people, and that it would very likely have a lot of legal action being taken place. So
mm,
I think it'd be a long situation where it played out over quite a long term, and there'd be tons of lawyers fighting for our rights in that situation to not have to give away that kind of information. So you'd always be able
mm,
to see the writing on the wall and maybe take action preemptively for it, trying
mm.
to, yeah, do some things like that. If you would like to really get out of this problem, you could buy your Bitcoin somewhere like BISC or
Yeah.
and learn about tools like CoinJoins and things, even though that's not quite as perfect to privacy, to start thinking about those things at least. Even if it's not for tax reasons, just privacy alone is so important. So if you do spend your stack, you don't want some random person on the internet or wherever to know exactly how much Bitcoin you have.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. So there are ways and means, I guess. But yeah, I think that whole field is going to develop.
Grab my charger here. It's like,
No, no, you're okay. Um, so cool. Okay, right. So just switching gears a bit, I guess. I mean, one of the things that I thought was interesting about Bitcoin is just again my own personal journey, right? So I was a very different. I'd say I was a suboptimal version of myself before I discovered Bitcoin. And I think what Bitcoin does is just ramps up everything, which you never. I thought, it's kind of like I have all these expectations of myself and things I wanted to do, but I was so focused on the now. I never kind of thought about the bigger picture. About I wasn't thinking in terms of generations or eons or eras. It was all literally next Friday I get paid sort of thing, right? And Bitcoin's definitely rewired that part of my brain. But Bitcoin, I think a lot of Bitcoiners that I speak with, they always tell me that their brain has been rewired by it. So I'm just curious how in your world, I mean, what are some of the more practical things that you've changed or you've adopted since you've discovered Bitcoin?
definitely have a lot of them. It changes you in so many different ways, right? You mentioned that you had a child recently too.
Yeah,
I did about a little over a year ago,
yeah,
and very much Bitcoin inspired that in some ways, where I really feel so much more financial freedom and hope now than I
yeah.
did prior. And I mean, there was no more passivity when it came to having a child, and I can very much like attribute that in a large way to Bitcoin.
Yeah,
I'm gonna just rapid fire them here because I have so many things, but another one would be
yeah.
proof of work. Like once you see how powerful like proof of work is, it's hard
Mm,
not to see that in other aspects. Like in writing, very much it's the amount of time that you've invested in something that's going to determine the outcome. And
brilliant.
it's
Yeah,
very easy to think like, oh, I'm just going to get lucky and this thing's going to be the best story ever,
yeah.
whatever. So there's
Or,
a
or
lot.
or lose hope when you don't get lucky, right? That's because that's so easy to throw in the towel when you haven't put in the work, and it's like, oh my God, but I deserve that stuff. But actually, you don't because you haven't put in the work, sort of thing. You know?
Definitely a shift there. Another one being the amount of like self trust you gain from it, like going through learning about it, having the trust in yourself to take self custody, learn about Bitcoin. I think that can kind of
Yeah.
change other aspects of your life too. Like there's definitely a self confidence aspect that came with it.
Yeah, I think that's a slippery slope though for me because I completely agree with all those 3 points, right? But on the last one, it's kind of like I sometimes feel I'm the smartest guy in the room, right? Which is really bad. Yeah, because it could be at a business meeting, it could be at work, and you have like these, like I mean, I don't know, senior engineers, they've been there for long, but then I start spouting shit about decentralization. They're like, "Who's this idiot?" You know? Um,
um,
so yeah, okay, no, interesting stuff. So the book's obviously work in progress, right? And that's probably taking up a majority of your time. You're still doing the work. I mean, your day job and stuff like that. So, do you see yourself transitioning into, as they say, the Bitcoin citadel, the Bitcoin life? Is that the eventual goal here, or do you think you're going to keep a feet in the fiat world as well?
we'll see. I'm taking it year by year. I think I'm for sure transitioning more to the Bitcoin world all the time and wanting to just give as much of my energy possible to the network. Like part of the reason for the book too, like outside of the desire to help convey ideas about Bitcoin more eloquently than they have been previously, is I just want to contribute more of my life energy to this new network. Like I've heard we've mentioned Jeff Booth before. He talks about this so frequently, and I really appreciate it. Like it was no longer just enough for me to invest in the network with my money. Like I want to contribute more deeply, and one of my best ways to possibly do that is via storytelling. It's something I'm really good at, and I put a lot of work into. And I genuinely feel like I can create something incredibly powerful that helps
Yeah.
the network. So
That's epic, man. That's brilliant. That's really inspiring to hear as well. Because like I said, I'm kind of on the same journey, and I really want to get myself out there and start telling these stories. Because I think the emotional side. So I used to be a very pragmatic person, right? Pre-Bitcoin, like it was all very transactional. But I
mhm.
think the other kind of change in me is like this you almost feel more stuff, right? And I think where it kind of put me in touch with my intuition so much more, like Bitcoin does, because it's like a filter over has been changed in my brain or in my eyes or whatever I view the world. It's kind of like, hey, you can feel this stuff, and when you start feeling it, it just makes so much more sense to me, and then I can sort of convert that into words and maybe help people with it. If nothing else, maybe they get a good hour of listening to me. So you know, it's all good either way.
Yeah, you brought up something really interesting to me, which is the more emotional side of Bitcoin,
Yeah,
where again, I'm a very logical person, engineering
yeah,
type. Um, but something that I think we can do a better job at, like people like myself that are very logical. I typically will make very logical arguments for Bitcoin. Um,
mm,
Showing the emotional side of things, which is one of the core things I believe that novels and stories are very good for. Where rather than just explain, like, here's perfect scarcity, 21 million, here's decentralization, all these technical concepts,
yeah,
specifically show somebody in a very problematic situation
yeah,
trying to escape their country with Bitcoin in their head, where there's like a
yeah,
deep emotional tie here. Like those
yeah,
kind of things really resonate with people. And I feel like that's one thing that's really lacking in the Bitcoin space. Like I love hearing podcasts of people that have used Bitcoin to escape from abusive relationships or to
yeah,
escape their country. Like to me, those are the most powerful ones, and
yeah,
I think those will connect more with people. So yeah, that's a huge part of the
yeah.
reason
No,
for
that,
Bitcoin.
that that's br- that that's epic because it kind of. Have you read Start with Why by Simon Sinek? Have you heard of that book? Okay, well, I mean, it kind of tells you. I mean, it talks about how the why, the purpose of anything, is actually it's almost a visceral reaction within someone. It's not something that can be necessarily even communicated in writing or in words, right? And that's what we call as, hey, I have a feeling, I have an intuition sort of thing, right? And again, I'm a very rational, scientific oriented person, and I was like, oh, like that's bollocks. I mean, like, what do you mean feelings? But then the more you think about it, it's literally a chemical reaction within your body that actually tells you what it is that you want because it's the pleasure centers in your brain going off, right? And he talks about how focusing on the why is what draws people into you. So in other words, Apple, when it advertises its camera, doesn't tell you how many megapixels it is because when you start explaining stuff in technical parlance or technical numbers, it loses that. It's like the semantic gap, right? It actually loses that touch of that feeling. So they instead tell you it takes great photos, right? And that, you know what I mean? Whereas Samsung might do it the other way, and they would go, we have a 150 megapixel camera that can shoot 7x. And so when you start sort of product fitting that idea, it just kind of loses that visceral feel of it. I think Bitcoin is similar to that thing as well, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely detracted a lot of people from adapting it more quickly.
Yeah,
Especially when you look at some of the people that were more quick to adapt in the first place, were very technologically minded people.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm endlessly grateful for them because they've helped me understand it too. But especially I think with these next waves of adoption that I believe are upcoming in the very near future, you're going to have to appeal more to the emotionality of people.
mm,
So, yeah, hoping to be a part
yeah,
of that.
yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely cool. One other thing I was going to bring up with you was, I guess, it's like a rapid fire question thing, which I like to bring into the thing, right? And it's just, I mean, your first snappy, quick answers, right? So here we go. We'll do five with them, and then we'll see how we get on. So, question one: how much is one Bitcoin going to be worth at the end of this year in
Ooh, yeah,
dollars?
115,000.
Wow. Okay. Who was Satoshi?
Ooh, I have a very specific prediction. I think I have a very I have a very confident predict not confident, but I have a person that I really like to think that it is. But I refuse to say their name out loud. If they want to be like anonymous, like even
Would I know this person?
yeah, you would. I mean,
Wow.
probably. Uh, they yeah. I don't want to say anything about them. I don't. I
Yeah,
very much do not want to make predictions about it. Like this,
fair
I think this
enough.
person made one of the biggest contributions ever to the world, and
Yeah.
chose to be
Uh,
anonymous. I respect that.
Yeah, agreed. I still have a feeling it's a group of people, to be honest. It's my personal opinion. I don't think it's one, but I think it's a work of like it's beyond genius. I mean, it's such a ridiculous idea, right?
Mhm.
That's exactly why I don't think one person could have conceived it and executed it. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm undermining the human sort of brain, right? I don't know.
No, I think
Um,
that's a great one too. I There's one person I think was involved no matter what. Let's put it that way. Even if
all
it
right.
was like a few
Okay.
of them included.
Fair enough. Right. The third question was about, yeah. So, at what would you trade one Bitcoin for?
Oh man,
What would you sell your Bitcoin for, basically?
more Bitcoin? I don't know. Like I mean, there's a number for everything, right? Like
Yeah.
eventually, like if it's something that can meaningfully change my family's life in a dramatic way, I would do it. Um, but the thing is, like I'm gonna want more Bitcoin with that. Like it would be a temporary measure to buy more Bitcoin in the future. Like eventually there will come a day where I maybe sell a sliver to make my child's life better way in the
Mm.
future. It's like in the short term, there's nothing.
No, there isn't. See, the opportunity cost is just way too high, isn't it? I mean, there's absolutely nothing anybody can give me and want my Bitcoin in return. At least today. I mean, there isn't.
I know.
Wow.
I will die with this thing.
Okay, cool. Two more quick questions. Yes, the what is the one purchase you've made in your life in fiat terms, which you actually wish you'd bought in Bitcoin instead?
Wish I'd bought in Bitcoin. Like, so the thing that I bought that I'd rather have just invested in Bitcoin, basically, or
Yeah, yeah.
saved.
Sorry, yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, the
Um,
biggest purchase in your life that you wish you hadn't. You simply just bought Bitcoin instead.
oh man, I've been pretty frugal since being a Bitcoiner, just because I know how deep I am into this thing. There's been a lot of purchases before that, though, like cars, that kind of thing, where yeah, that's probably one of the bigger ones. Like I've put off doing a lot of things so I can increase my stack size. So I don't have a great list. Pre Bitcoin though, there was lots of stuff I really wish I would have had into Bitcoin
Yeah,
instead. But I mean, who doesn't?
yeah. I sold some Bitcoin to make a down payment for for the house that we bought, and yeah, I just regret that, man. I just wish I held the Bitcoin rather than the house because I mean you can just like housing is a bit. I think people are gonna quickly realize that housing is not as effective a store of value as Bitcoin. You know?
Very much so. Well, just think of the costs of even investing in real estate. Like it, it blows my mind that people think that a house that is built to last for like 100 years, especially in the area that I live, it's kind of shorter term, like suburb housing,
Hmm.
like that this thing is going to be an investment for hundreds of years. Like this
Yeah.
thing is depreciating. It constantly needs upkeep, new roofs, and these things. If you decide to rent it out, then you have to deal with tenants and
Yeah.
destruction of things. Like just hold Bitcoin. Don't deal with that entire class of problems and outperform it.
Absolutely.
It's crazy. I think people are going to
Yeah.
realize it eventually.
I think they have to, and also the mobility aspect. I mean, what happens if you want to switch countries? I mean, are you going to bring your house with you? You know, are you? And what happens to the? And again, this is this whole fiat mindset because the number goes up in fiat too, right? And the number keeps going up for your house price. But if you really think about it, I mean, after you sell your house, you're still going to have to buy a house to live in eventually. So all of that inflation is simply going to pre-transfer to the new asset.
Yep.
Not only that, you're going to have to pay taxes on your sale. You have to redo the house. You have to buy furniture. If your boiler breaks, that's a couple of grand. I mean, how much does it cost you to maintain your Bitcoin? Like a hard wallet, I guess. I mean, and
Barely
that's about
any.
it. Yeah, not even that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. You do it cold. You could do it on your phone, right?
Mm.
So yeah, no, I think I'm in agreement with you, and I think overall that's actually going to release this sort of grip of houses as or of property management companies and stuff like this, which is all kind of they all exist because houses exist as an investment tool. And I think shelter and like food, like the internet as well, I think should be a human right, nearly. I mean, it shouldn't be something that you deny somebody else because they can't afford to get it. I mean, like that's ridiculous.
I hear the phrase rent seeking used a
Yeah,
lot, especially by Jake Jimmy Song. Well, that's the biggest form of rent seeking in the world. It's literally like renting like these things. And it's
yeah,
crazy. That's probably the most damaging industry that's hyper financialized is the housing market. There's a lot of it. There's a lot of problems, but
yeah.
it's
Remember
huge.
what happened the last time it crashed?
Yeah.
Well, we got the Bitcoin white paper out of it, so maybe some good can happen.
Hopefully.
And, yeah, and finally, right, last question. Will there ever be harder money than Bitcoin?
Oh no. I've thought about this a little bit for sure. I'm sure everybody Bitcoiner does as they go down the rabbit hole. But it's kind of what I alluded to earlier with the Ethereum thing, where their supply inconsistency, or like there's even other like altcoin things out there that are trying to have supplies that diminish over time. And I think that's inherently worse. Like you can't
Mm,
get more perfect than zero. There's no inflation, there's no deflation. In my opinion, I don't think Bitcoin's inflationary since we already know all the Bitcoin that will exist. We're just discovering it essentially. Um,
mhm.
it's like will there ever be a better zero? Like, I don't think so.
Yeah,
It's kind of
yeah,
that
that's a
same
great
idea.
point. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Okay, awesome. So look, I mean, look, we've had a bit of a whirlwind conversation, loads of different topics. Thanks so much again for taking the time to do this. Hopefully, it was a good, well, meaningful conversation for you. But I'm sure the listeners would love it as well. Best of luck with the book. Keep us all updated on how that goes. And hopefully we can buy it. Well, that's something I might spend a couple of sats buying, right? So look, yeah, all the best again with everything, Michael. And I'm sure there's so many more topics. Bitcoin is just this beast, and we're all hooked to it, right? So
I,
thanks again for your time.
talking with you has only made me more excited and bullish about it. So thank you
Yeah,
so much.
same here, mate. Cheers. Thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Bye.